The button slipped free. Then another. Sade did not stop him. She knew she should. She knew exactly who this man was, what this house was, what morning would look like when the feeling wore off, and he remembered he did not do this kind of thing with staff. She knew all of it, and she still let him push her cardigan off her shoulder. Seo Rayan kissed her like he had been angry about something for a long time, and she was the only thing that made it quiet. His hand came up to her jaw, tilting her face exactly where he wanted it. She grabbed the front of his shirt without thinking. The room was dark. The house was empty. And every rule she had built around herself to survive working in this place was coming apart at the seam. She closed her eyes. She told herself it was just one night. She told herself she knew better. She told herself she would be fine by morning. She was wrong about all three. The Seo mansion did not feel like a place people lived in. It felt like a place people performed in. 12 rooms, 4 floors, a kitchen that had been featured in an architecture magazine 3 years ago, and a swimming pool that nobody used except for guests who wanted to say they had. The staff were 5 in total: a driver, a groundskeeper, 2 security personnel, and Sade Khumalo, who managed everything inside the house and answered directly to no one except the man who owned it. Sade had worked there for 2 years, long enough to know the patterns, long enough to know which marble floors echoed when you walked too fast, and which doors you had to lift slightly before pulling shut. Long enough to know that on Tuesday nights, Seo Rayan came home late, and on Friday mornings, Chai Suyan left before the rest of the house woke up, her heels clicking down the stairs like she was trying not to be heard, but not trying hard enough. Long enough to know better than to feel anything about any of it. She was 26 years old, and she had grown up watching her mother clean other people's houses in Johannesburg. She was not ashamed of this work. She was good at it. She moved through the mansion with a quiet efficiency that made her nearly invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. Invisible meant unbothered. Unbothered meant safe. The morning she first saw Chae Suyan, she was carrying a tray of coffee to the upper landing. Suyan was standing at the top of the stairs in one of Rayan's shirts, her hair loose, looking like she belonged in a painting. She looked at Sade the way beautiful women, who are used to being looked at, sometimes look at women they do not perceive as competition, with a kind of blank pleasantness that is almost worse than dismissal. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Sade said back. That was the entirety of their relationship for the first 6 months. Suyan came and went. Other women came and went faster. Sade learned to read the signs: a specific cologne in the hallway, a second wine glass on the counter in the morning, shoes that did not belong to any regular visitor near the front door. She stopped noticing after a while. Or, she told herself she did. Seo Rayan himself was not what people expected when they imagined a billionaire. He was not loud about it. He did not wear his money the way some men did, Seo draped over everything, impossible to ignore. He was quiet in the way that people who have never had to prove anything tend to be quiet. Tall, unhurried, the kind of man who walked into a room and the room simply adjusted. He spoke to Sade the way he spoke to all his staff, with a clipped professionalism that was not unkind but was not warm either. He said please and thank you. He did not hover or micromanage. He paid well and on time. In 2 years, he had never once looked at her like she was a person with an interior life. She preferred it that way. The one who actually saw her was Oh Minho. Rayan's best friend arrived the way he always arrived, unannounced, already talking, walking through the front door like he had a key because he did. He was the kind of man who made a room louder just by entering it. Not obnoxiously, just warmly. He remembered the names of every person in the house. He asked the groundskeeper about his daughter's school exams. He once spent 20 minutes helping Sade figure out why the coffee machine was making a grinding noise before either of them realized it was simply out of beans. He made her laugh. She had not expected that. He also looked at her sometimes in a way she filed away and chose not to examine too closely. On the Thursday that everything began to shift, Minho arrived at the house to find Sade reorganizing the wine cellar and sat on the bottom step of the cellar stairs just to talk to her while she worked. "You have been here 2 years," he said. She did not look up from the bottle in her hand. "Yes. And you have never once looked uncomfortable in this house." She set the bottle in its rack. "Should I?" He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes fully. "Most people do. This place has a way of getting to people." She looked at him then. "I know what this house is. I knew before I took the job. I do not bring feelings to work." Minho was quiet for a moment. Then, Rayan said something similar once, almost word for word. She did not respond to that. She turned back to the wine rack and kept working, but the comparison sat with her longer than she wanted it to. That same evening, Chae Soo-yeon arrived for dinner. Sade set the table for two, lit the candles the way she had been instructed, and made herself scarce. From the kitchen, she could hear the low register of Rayan's voice and the musical rise and fall of Soo-yeon's laugh. She had heard that laugh many times. It was a laugh that knew it was being listened to. She was plating dessert when Soo-yeon appeared in the kitchen doorway. She did this sometimes, wandered into spaces that were not hers, as if to remind herself that everything in the house was accessible to her. "The food is wonderful as always," she said. "Thank you," Sade said. Soo-yeon leaned against the doorframe. "How long have you been here now?" 2 years. 2 years. She said it like she was calculating something. "And you have seen everything in that time, I imagine." Sade kept her eyes on the plate. "I do my job. I do not pay attention to things that are not my business." Soo-yeon smiled. "Smart girl." She turned and walked back to the dining room. Sade stood very still for a moment after she left. Then she picked up the dessert plates and followed. She had been in this house 2 years. She knew every pattern, every sound, or every sign. What she did not know, what she could not have prepared for, was that in 4 days, everything she had so carefully kept in its place was going to come undone. And it was going to start with a dark study, a man sitting alone, and her name spoken quietly in a way nobody in this house had ever spoken it before. If you want him, keep watching, because the night everything changed is next, and nothing about it goes the way either of them planned. It was a Wednesday. Sade remembered that detail later, because Wednesdays were the days she stayed late to do the full house inventory, checking supplies, restocking, making sure everything was in its place before the week tipped into the weekend. The rest of the staff had already gone home. The groundskeeper had locked the outer gate. The driver had parked the cars and left. It was just her in the house. And then Rayan came home. She heard the front door from the kitchen. She heard his footsteps cross the entrance hall, and then stop. That was the first unusual thing. He always went straight upstairs. Always. She had timed it enough times without meaning to that it had become part of the house rhythm. Door, footsteps, stairs, silence. Tonight the footsteps stopped. She waited. Nothing. She dried her hands on the cloth by the sink and walked to the hallway. The study door was open. The light was off. She pushed it wider. Rayan was sitting in the chair behind his desk in complete darkness. Jacket still on. No laptop open. No phone in his hand. Just sitting the way a man sits when something has gone wrong that he cannot fix by doing anything at all. She should have said goodnight and left him to it. That was the smart thing. That was the invisible thing. Instead, she reached inside the doorway and turned on the small side lamp, the one that gave light without flooding the room, and walked in. He looked up. She set a glass of water on the desk in front of him without a word and sat down in the chair across from him. Not close, just present. He stared at her. She looked back at him calmly. "What are you doing?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Sitting," she said. He almost laughed. Almost. Something moved across his face that was not quite amusement and not quite surprise, but lived somewhere between the two. They were quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that in any other context between any other two people would have been unbearable. Between them it was just still. He spoke first. "I had a partner," he said. "Business. 7 years. He was moving money out of a shared account for 14 months before I found out." She did not gasp, did not rush to fill the silence with reassurance. She just listened. He looked at the glass of water, like he was deciding something. 7 years. "I built half of what I have with that man, sitting across the table from me. That is a long time to trust someone," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." Another silence. "Longer this time." "Did you eat?" she asked. He blinked. "What?" She was already standing. "Did you eat today?" "Properly." He said nothing, which was answer enough. She went to the kitchen. She did not make anything elaborate. Rice, a simple stew she pulled together from what was already prepared. The kind of food that was warm without being fussy. She brought it back to the study on a tray and set it in front of him. He looked at the food, then at her. "Sit," he said. She hesitated. "Sit down, Sade." It was the first time she had heard him say her name like that. Not the clipped professional way he usually moved through the names of his staff. Something slower, like he was paying attention to the sound of it. She sat. He ate. She sat across from him in the lamplight, and they talked. Not about the betrayal, not about the money, but about other things. Small things that opened into larger ones the way conversations do when the hour is late and the house is empty and there is no performance required from either person. She told him about Johannesburg without meaning to, about her mother, about the particular quality of morning light in the house she grew up in, and how she still sometimes woke up expecting it. He told her about the first company he built at 22, with nothing but borrowed equipment and a rented room. Before the mansion. Before all of it. She had worked in this house for 2 years and had not known any of this. He had lived in this house for 4 years and had not known any of this about her either. At some point, the tray was pushed aside. At some point, the conversation slowed into something quieter. She was not sure when the atmosphere changed, only that it did, the way pressure changes before rain. Gradual and then, all at once. He was looking at her differently. She felt it before she confirmed it with her eyes. When she finally looked up, he was already watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the distant professionalism, not the easy confidence he wore around women who wanted something from him. Something quieter than all of that. Something that looked almost like uncertainty. He said her name again. Sade. She should have stood up. She knew that. Every sensible part of her was already calculating the exit. The chair pushing back. The tray picked up. Good night. Door closed. Back to her room. Back to invisible. Back to safe. She did not move. He reached across the desk slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back and touched her jaw with 2 fingers, tilting her face toward him. The same way she had imagined in that brief, unguarded moment she refused to admit she had ever had. She did not pull back. He stood, came around the desk. She rose to meet him without fully deciding to, and then there was no desk between them and no distance, and he kissed her like the question had already been asked and answered without either of them speaking it aloud. Her hands found the front of his shirt. His found her face, her waist, the cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She told herself it was just the hour, just the vulnerability of a man who had been betrayed and a woman who had been alone in a quiet house too long. She told herself it was circumstance, proximity, nothing that would survive the morning. She told herself all of this while she let it happen, and somewhere in the back of her mind, behind every reasonable thought she was constructing to protect herself, something else was saying, "You have wanted this, not him, not the billionaire, not the man women lined up for. Him, the one who sat in the dark, the one who said her name slowly, the one who ate her food and told her about a rented room at 22. That man." She shut the thought down before it finished forming. She woke before 5. The room was still dark. Rayan was asleep beside her, one arm loose across the sheets, breathing slow and even. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling. Then she got up. She moved quietly, found her clothes, straightened herself in the bathroom mirror with the light off, using only what came through the gap in the curtain. She looked at her own face for a long moment. She knew this man. She had watched him for 2 years. She knew what morning looked like in this house after a night like this. She was not going to be another name he forgot. She walked downstairs. By the time Rayan came down at 7:15, she was already in the kitchen. Coffee made, breakfast laid out. She turned when she heard him and met his eyes with a calm, professional expression that gave him absolutely nothing. "Good morning," she said. "Your 7:30 call has been confirmed. There is fresh coffee." He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. She turned back to the counter. He said her name. She did not turn around. "Your jacket from last night is on the hook by the study door. I will have it pressed before noon. Sade." She picked up the cloth by the sink and wiped down the already clean counter. He was quiet for a long moment. Then she heard him pour his coffee, pick up his phone, and walk to his study. She stood at the counter and kept her breathing even. She was fine. She was completely fine. She told herself that 11 more times before 9 o'clock. 3 days passed. Rayan did not bring it up. Neither did she. The house returned to its rhythms. The driver arriving at 7, the groundskeeper at 8, deliveries signed for, rooms turned over, the quiet machinery of a well-run household moving exactly as it always had. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, Sade was running a very careful operation. She had rules now. Unspoken, internal, non-negotiable. Do not linger in rooms he is already in. Complete the task and leave. Keep responses short and professional. Do not meet his eyes for longer than the conversation requires. Do not think about Wednesday night. Do not think about the lamp. Do not think about the way he said her name the second time slower, like he meant it differently. Do not think about any of it. The rules worked for approximately 4 days. On the 5th day, he came into the kitchen while she was making lunch and sat down at the island without being invited, without a laptop, without his phone. Just sat there. She kept her back to him and continued chopping. "You do not have to do that," he said. She did not turn around. "Do what?" "That. Whatever that is that you are doing. I am making lunch." "That is not what I mean, and you know it." She set the knife down, turned, looked at him with the most neutral expression she owned. "Is there something you need, sir?" Something moved across his face. Not quite irritation, not quite amusement. Something that did not have a clean name. So he looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and left the kitchen. She picked the knife back up. Her hand was not entirely steady. He started appearing in places he had no particular reason to be. Not obviously. Not in a way she could name directly or report or even articulate to herself without feeling like she was constructing something out of nothing. He was in his own house. He was allowed to be anywhere in it. But 2 years of learning his patterns had made her sensitive to deviation, and the deviations were increasing. He came back early from a meeting on a Tuesday and walked through the kitchen instead of going straight upstairs. He stopped in the doorway of the sitting room while she was dusting and asked a question about a delivery that he could have sent a message about. He came down for water at 11 on a night. She was still finishing the weekly accounts at the kitchen table and stood at the counter drinking it slowly, not going back upstairs immediately, not starting a conversation, just present. She did not acknowledge any of it beyond what was required, but she felt all of it. Minho noticed before anyone else. He arrived on a Friday afternoon and found Sade polishing the windows in the upper corridor. He leaned against the wall and watched her work for a moment with an expression she could not read from the side. "You look tired," he said. "I am fine." "That is not what I said." She kept polishing. "Is there something you need, Minho?" He was quiet for a beat. "Has he said anything to you?" She stopped, turned, looked at him carefully. "About what?" Minho held her gaze. "About anything." She resumed polishing. "No?" He nodded slowly. He watched her for another moment. Then, "You know you can talk to me. If something is on your mind, nothing is on my mind. I do my job. Minho pushed off the wall. Right, he said, like she had confirmed something he already suspected. He walked downstairs, and she heard him go into the study where Rayan was. She heard the door close. She pressed the cloth against the glass and held it there without moving. What Minho said to Rayan in that study she did not know. What she knew was that afterwards Rayan came out and stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her on the upper landing for a moment before going to the kitchen. She knew that because she felt it, that particular quality of being looked at. And when she glanced down, he was already turning away. That evening, Soo-yeon arrived. She was dressed deliberately. That was the only way Sade could describe it. Every detail chosen with intention. She swept into the entrance hall and kissed Rayan on the cheek and laughed at something he said, and was generally so thoroughly herself that the whole house seemed to rearrange around her presence. Sade served drinks in the sitting room and left. She was in the laundry room 20 minutes later when she heard heels on the tile and looked up to find Soo-yeon in the doorway. She did not say good evening this time. She leaned against the frame and looked at Sade with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and completely cold. You have been here 2 years, she said. Yes, Sade said. She kept folding. And in 2 years, I have never had to think about you. Sade looked up then, met her eyes directly. And now? Soo-yeon smiled. The same smile from the dining room doorway, the one that did not mean what smiles were supposed to mean. And now I find myself thinking about you quite a lot. She pushed off the doorframe and walked back down the corridor. Sade stood very still with a folded pillowcase in her hands. She had known this was coming. She had known from the morning she walked out of that room and wiped down a clean counter. She had known that this house had eyes, and that the most dangerous pair of them belonged to a woman who had never once underestimated anything in her life. What she had not expected was how quickly it would arrive, or how calm she would feel standing in the middle of it. The moment that broke Rayan's composure happened on a Sunday. He had a guest, a business associate, older, expensively dressed, the kind of man who treated every room like it belonged to him. Sade was serving during the meeting, moving quietly in and out the way she always did. At some point, the man said something to her. She did not catch all of it. Something about the coffee, something about how long she had worked there, and then something else that was said quietly, with a particular kind of smile that men like that used when they thought no one important was listening. She kept her expression neutral, answered professionally, continued serving. The meeting wrapped up 40 minutes later. She was clearing the table when Rayan came back into the room after seeing the man out. She assumed he was collecting something he had left behind. He stood in the doorway. What did he say to you? Rayan said. She stacked the cups without looking up. Nothing that needs your attention. Sade? She finally looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. Something tight, something controlled with visible effort. I heard the tone of it, he said. I want to know what he said. It was handled, she said quietly. It is fine. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and typed something. A message to someone, short. She did not see what it said. That associate did not come back to the house again. She found out from the driver 3 days later that the business relationship had been terminated. She stood in the kitchen when she heard that and was quiet for a long time. This was the thing about Seo Rayan that nobody outside the house understood. He was not loud about things. He did not make speeches or declarations. He simply acted, quietly, completely. She had known that about him for 2 years. What she had not known was that he would ever aim that quality in her direction. She went back to work. But something had shifted in her carefully maintained interior. Something small and inconvenient that she could not locate precisely enough to shut down. That night she lay in her room and looked at the ceiling and had a conversation with herself that she had been avoiding for 11 days. She was not fine. She had never been fine. She had simply been performing fine with the same discipline she brought to everything else in her life. And it had worked, until a man sat in a dark room and said her name like it mattered to him how it sounded. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. See, this was not allowed. She knew his world. She had cleaned up after his world for 2 years. Women came through that front door, full of feeling, and left lighter, emptier, quieter than they arrived. She was not going to be one of them. She was not. She turned over and closed her eyes. In the room above hers, she knew this because she knew the house Seo Rayan was awake too. She did not let herself think about that. Minho came back on a Tuesday. He found Rayan in the gym and closed the door behind him, and the conversation that followed was the kind that only happened between people who had known each other long enough to skip the surface. "He is going to ask me about her," Rayan said before Minho could start. Minho sat on the bench. "I know. I do not know what to do with this." "That is the first honest thing you have said about a woman in 4 years." Rayan stopped, looked at him. Minho held the look evenly. "I am just noting it. She works for me. I am aware. She has made it clear she does not want, has she?" Minho tilted his head slightly. "Or has she made it clear she is protecting herself from you? Those are not the same thing." Rayan said nothing. Minho leaned forward. "There is something you should know about me." He paused. "I like her too." The room was very quiet. "I am telling you because you are my best friend," Minho continued, "and because I would rather say it plainly than have it become something else later. I am not going to act on it, but I am also not going to pretend I do not see what is happening in this house." Rayan looked at him for a long time. Then he picked up his water bottle and took a drink and said nothing at all, which was, Minho knew its own kind of answer. What neither of them knew was that across the city, in an apartment with a view of the Han River and a phone full of unanswered questions, Chae Soo-yeon was drawing her own conclusions. And she was not the kind of woman who waited for confirmation before she acted. She has been holding herself together with both hands. He has been circling without landing, and Soo-yeon has already decided what she is going to do about it. Chae Soo-yeon had a particular gift. She could read a room the way other people read faces, not the surface of it, not what was being presented, but the texture underneath, the temperature of a space, the quality of a silence, the way two people who were pretending not to be aware of each other moved around each other with just a little too much precision. She had walked into Rayan's world 2 years ago with her eyes open. She had known what he was from the beginning, had known and chosen it anyway, because Soo-yeon was not a woman who needed a man to complete anything. She had her own money, her own apartment, her own life that continued perfectly well on the days he was not in it. What they had suited her. No demands, no performances. Just two people who enjoyed each other and had agreed without saying so that enjoyment was enough. It had been enough. Until it wasn't. She could not name the exact moment she felt it shift. It was not a single thing. It was an accumulation. Small, almost imperceptible changes in the texture of her time with Rayan that she had been cataloging without fully admitting she was doing so. He was present, but not quite there. That was the only way she could describe it. When she spoke, he listened. When she laughed, he responded. All the correct things happened in the correct order. But something behind his eyes had moved somewhere else, and she could not locate where it had gone. She thought about it for 2 weeks before she decided to find out. She arrived on a Saturday, unannounced. She had a key. She had always had a key. She used it now, without knocking, and moved through the entrance hall with the ease of a woman who had never had reason to feel uncertain in this space. The house was quiet. She heard Rayan's voice from the direction of his study. A phone call. Low and businesslike. She did not go to him immediately. She set her bag on the entrance hall table and walked slowly toward the kitchen. She was not sure what she was looking for. She found something anyway. Sade was at the counter with her back to the door, chopping fruit for what looked like a preparation tray. She was not doing anything unusual. She was not doing anything she had not done 100 times before in this kitchen, but she was humming. Softly, absently, the way a person hums when they are alone and comfortable and not performing anything for anyone. And then Rayan came off his call. Suyan heard his footsteps cross the hallway toward the kitchen, and she stepped back slightly into the shadow of the corridor without fully deciding to. He came in. Sade heard him and half turned. And for just a fraction of a second, before she assembled her professional expression, before the careful neutrality came down like a curtain, there was something else on her face, something unguarded, something that knew him. Rayan stopped at the counter 2 feet from her. He did not touch her. He did not say anything significant. He asked about the afternoon schedule in a perfectly normal voice, and she answered in a perfectly normal voice, and the entire exchange lasted less than a minute. But his hand, as he turned to leave, came up and tucked a loose thread from her collar back into place. One small absent gesture, the kind a person makes without thinking, because their hands already know what they want. He walked back out. Sade stood at the counter and was very still for a moment. Suyan stood in the corridor and did not move at all. She had been in this house dozens of times. She had seen Rayan move through this space with his staff, with his guests, with every woman he had ever brought through that door. She knew every register of him. She had never seen him touch anyone like that. Not her. Not anyone. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like his hand already knew the way there. She stood in the corridor for another moment. Then she smoothed the front of her jacket, picked up her bag from the entrance table, and walked out the front door. She did not say goodbye. She did not slam the door. She closed it quietly behind her. Rayan noticed she had been and gone when he came back downstairs 20 minutes later and found only her perfume in the entrance hall. He stood there for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called her. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was perfectly even. "Something came up," she said. "I will call you later." She did not call him later. He stood in the entrance hall and looked at the front door and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who had been dishonest with himself for several weeks, that something had broken open. Not between them, in him. Suyan spent Sunday doing what she always did when she needed to think. She worked. She sat at her desk in her apartment and moved through her schedule and answered her emails and did not allow herself to feel anything until she had thought it through completely. By evening, she had arrived at a simple conclusion. The situation was not yet beyond management. Rayan did not know what he felt. He was circling something he had not yet named. The maid, Sade, she made herself use the name, she would not reduce her to a position, was pulling back deliberately, which meant she was not foolish. She understood the danger of the territory she was in. None of it had become anything yet, which meant there was still time. Suyan was not a woman who made scenes. She was not going to arrive at the house screaming or throwing things or demanding explanations. That was not her. That had never been her. She was going to handle this quietly, the way she handled everything. She called a man named Jin, not a dangerous man, not anyone who would hurt anyone. Jin was simply someone who knew how to find information and how to be discreet about it. She had used him twice before for business matters. He was efficient, and he did not ask unnecessary questions. "Find out about the maid," she said. "Sade Khumalo. South African. Working for Seo Rayan, 2 years. I want to know everything that matters." He came back to her within 48 hours. She read the file he sent on her laptop with a glass of wine and an expression that did not change. South African. Grew up in Johannesburg. Mother a domestic worker. Came to Seoul on a work visa 3 years ago. No significant relationships on record. One thing of note. A younger sister back home. Still in school. Rayan's salary was the primary thing keeping that situation stable. Suyan closed the laptop. She had what she needed. She called Sade on a Wednesday, not Rayan's Wednesday, a different one, 3 weeks after the corridor. Once she used a number Sade would not recognize. And when Sade answered with a cautious hello, Suyan simply said, "I think we should meet. Just the two of us. There is a cafe on Apgujeong Road. Tomorrow at 11. I think you already know this conversation is necessary. A long silence. Then, I will be there. Suyan hung up. The cafe was quiet at 11 on a Thursday morning. Suyan was already there when Sade arrived, seated at a corner table, 2 cups of tea already ordered, dressed simply and expensively the way she always was. She looked up when Sade walked in and gestured to the seat across from her without standing. Sade sat. She did not look afraid. That was the first thing Suyan noted. She had expected nerves, the particular nerves of a woman who knew she had crossed a line and was waiting for the consequences. What she got instead was stillness, the same quality she had seen in Sade in the kitchen, a woman who had decided something before she arrived and was not going to be moved from it. Interesting. I am not here to threaten you, Suyan said. Sade looked at her evenly. Then what are you here for? Suyan wrapped both hands around her cup. I am here to be honest with you, woman to woman, because I think you are intelligent enough to appreciate that. Go ahead. I know what happened between you and Rayan. I do not know the details, and I do not want them. What I know is enough. She paused. What I also know is that you are aware of what his world is. You have been in that house 2 years. You have seen what happens. Sade said nothing. What you may not have considered, Suyan continued. This is what happens to the people around a man like him when things become complicated. She tilted her head slightly. Your sister is in her final year. The fees are significant. Your visa renewal is in 4 months. Those processes are smoother when everything is stable and your employment record is clean and uncomplicated. The cafe was very quiet. Sade looked at her across the table. And if I walk away from the job? Everything stays simple, Suyan said. I am not your enemy, Sade. I am simply a woman who has more to lose than you realize, and more tools than you may have considered. Sade looked down at her cup of tea. She had not touched it. A long silence stretched between them. Then Sade looked up. Her expression had not changed. But something behind her eyes had. Something that looked less like fear and more like a decision arriving. I will think about it, she said. Suyan nodded once. That is all I ask. They did not shake hands. Sade stood, pushed in her chair, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Suyan sat alone at the corner table and finished her tea. She was confident. She had no reason yet not to be. What she did not know, what she could not have accounted for, was that Oh Minho had seen Sade's face when she came back to the house that afternoon. He had been leaving just as she was arriving. He stopped on the front steps and looked at her. Really looked, and said nothing for a moment. Then, what happened? Nothing, she said. He stepped back inside and closed the front door behind both of them. Tell me, he said. Minho listened without interrupting. Sade told him everything, the cafe, the tea that went cold, the sister, the visa, the quiet precision of a woman who knew exactly which pressure points to press. She told it the way she did everything, without performance, without tears, just the facts laid out in order. When she finished, Minho was quiet for a long time. They were sitting in the kitchen. The house was empty. Rayan was at a meeting across the city that would not end until evening. Minho looked at his hands on the table. She did this herself, he said finally, not through anyone else. Yes. He nodded slowly, which means she is more rattled than she is showing. Sade looked at him. Suyan does not make personal visits, he said. She does not sit in cafes and have quiet conversations. She is a woman who lets things resolve themselves because she has always been confident they will resolve in her favor. He paused. The fact that she came to you directly means she is not confident anymore. Sade absorbed that. That does not change what she said about my sister, she said quietly. No, Minho agreed. It does not. Another silence. Then, are you going to leave? She looked at the table. I do not know. Minho was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she did not expect. There is something you should know about Rayan. Something that explains, not excuses, explains, why he built this life the way he did. She looked up. 4 years ago, Minho said carefully, there was a woman. Before all of this, before the revolving door and the arrangement with Suyeon and the version of himself he has been performing ever since. Her name was Yuna. They were together 3 years. He was going to marry her. Sade was very still. She left, Minho continued. Not for another man. Not for anything dramatic. She left because she said loving him was like loving a closed room. She could feel the warmth through the door, but he would never let her in. She said she could not spend her life in a hallway. He stopped. He told me once that she was right, that he knew she was right, and he let her go anyway because he did not know how to be the man who opened the door. He said it was easier to be what he became than to keep failing at what he actually wanted to be. The kitchen was completely silent. Sade looked at the table for a long time. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you are the first person in 4 years that he has let see the room," Minho said. "Not the door, the room. And I think you already know that. I think that is exactly why you are so frightened." She did not answer. Because he was right. Minho left an hour later. Sade sat in the kitchen alone until the light changed and the afternoon moved toward evening. She thought about her sister. She thought about the visa. She thought about Suyeon's hands wrapped around a teacup and the smile that did not reach anywhere it was supposed to reach. Then she thought about a man sitting in the dark, a tray of food, a side lamp. Her name said slowly, like it mattered how it sounded. She got up and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands together between her knees. She had 2 options. She could leave, find another position, keep her sister's situation stable through other means, disappear from this house and from Seo Rayan's orbit and go back to being invisible somewhere else. It was the safe option, the reasonable option, the option that protected everything she had spent years carefully building. Or she could stay. Not for him. Not because of what had happened between them, or what Minho had just told her, or the way his hand had found her collar without thinking, but because she was tired of making herself small to fit into spaces that other people had decided were appropriate for her. She was tired of invisible. She pressed her hands together harder. Then she heard the front door. Rayan was home. She did not go downstairs immediately. She heard him move through the house, the study, the kitchen, back to the entrance hall. She heard him pause at the bottom of the stairs. She heard his footsteps come up. They stopped outside her door. A knock. Quiet. Not demanding. She stood up, opened it. He was still in his work clothes. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the hallway between them was very narrow and very quiet. "Minho called me," he said. She felt something tighten in her chest. "What did he tell you?" "Everything." He paused. "Suyeon, the cafe, what she said about your sister." Sade held the doorframe. "It is being handled." "It is already handled," he said. His voice was level, but underneath it was something controlled very deliberately. "I spoke to her an hour ago. Whatever she thinks she was going to do, she will not." Sade looked at him carefully. "What did you say to her?" "I ended it." He said it simply, completely. "Whatever it was, I ended it." The hallway was very quiet. "So you did not have to do that," she said. "I know." She looked at him. He looked back at her. She said, "Minho told me about Yuna." Something moved across his face. He looked away briefly, then back. "I know that too. He called me before you did." She almost smiled despite herself. "He told you he was going to tell me?" "He told me he already had." Rayan exhaled slowly. "He said if I did not come home and say something real to you, he was going to say something real for me, and I would like it less." She looked at her hands on the doorframe. He took a step closer. Not closing the distance entirely, just reducing it. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I have spent 4 years making sure I would never have to learn. He paused. So, but I have been standing outside this door for 10 minutes, and I cannot make myself walk away. She looked up at him. The hallway was the narrowest it had ever been. She said, I am not Soo Yan. I'm not going to wait in a hallway. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. Just, do not leave. Not yet. Give me the chance to be something worth staying for. She looked at him for a long time. All the reasonable thoughts lined up in her head, the ones she had been constructing and maintaining, and reinforcing for weeks. She knew them all by heart. She could recite them in order. She let them go. She stepped back from the door. He came in. They did not make any promises that night. They did not talk about what it would look like, or how the house would change, or what the staff would think, or any of the practical geography of two people deciding to try. None of that happened. What happened was simpler than all of it. They sat on the small couch by her window, and she told him about her mother again. More this time, the parts she had edited out the first time. And he told her about the company he built at 22. More of that too, the parts that were harder to say. The failure before the success. The months of nothing. At some point, she fell asleep against his shoulder. He sat very still so she would not wake up. In the morning, she opened her eyes, and he was still there. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then she stood up and said, I am making breakfast. He said, I know. And she walked out, and he followed, and in the kitchen, she made coffee, and he sat at the island, and they moved around each other in the quiet of an early morning, like two people who were learning the shape of a new thing. Not perfectly, not without everything it was going to cost them both, but together. Minho came by that afternoon. He walked in with his usual lack of announcement and stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw them. Sade at the counter, Rayan at the island with a coffee cup, a conversation happening between them that was low and ordinary and completely unperformed. He stood there for a moment. Something moved across his face, something that was not entirely without pain, because he was honest enough with himself to admit what he had felt and what he was choosing to set aside. He was Rayan's best friend. He had been that for 15 years. He understood what it meant to want something and love someone enough to let them have it instead. He cleared his throat. They both looked up. Nobody said anything for a beat. Then Minho walked to the coffee machine, poured himself a cup, sat down at the island 2 seats from Rayan, and said, So, what is for breakfast? Sade looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the counter. Eggs, she said. Sit down. He sat. Rayan looked at his best friend across the island. Minho looked back at him. Something passed between them that did not need words. The particular language of 15 years of knowing each other, of choosing each other through things that could have ended the friendship and did not. Rayan picked up his coffee. Minho picked up his. And in the kitchen of a house that had spent 4 years being a place people performed in, something quiet and unhurried and entirely unperformed was beginning. As for Soo Yan, she received a transfer confirmation 3 days later, a sum that was not an apology and not a payment, simply Rayan being the kind of man who settled things completely and without drama. She sat with her phone in her apartment and looked at the notification for a long time. She was not destroyed by it. She was Soo Yan. She did not get destroyed, but she sat with it longer than she had expected to. Because somewhere underneath the calculation and the composure and the careful management of everything, she had felt something for him too. Something she had never named, because naming it would have required admitting she wanted more than she had agreed to want. She put her phone down. She poured herself a glass of wine. She looked at the view of the city from her window, and she thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that the thing about deciding not to need anyone was that it worked perfectly until it didn't. She drank her wine. She did not call him. She did not call anyone. She sat with the city and the quiet and the particular weight of a woman who had played everything correctly and still lost, and she let herself feel it. Just this once. Just tonight. Before she put it away and moved on. She was very good at moving on. If you have ever held yourself together so tightly that you forgot what it felt like to let someone in, this story was for you. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stayed or walked away? And if you are new here, subscribe, because the next story is already coming and trust me, you do not want to miss it.